you love it, then, if it's what you want to do. And I think this was sort of where I learned, like, after having made some games, I'm like, yeah, okay, this is really, yeah, I do want to do this after all.
Hello, it's very nice to meet you. So, you are one of the developers at Offensive Magenta Studios?
Offensive Magenta Games.
Offensive Magenta Games. I did a little look on your website. So you guys are a team of 3 people, and I guess you guys met at college. Could you tell me a little bit more about how you guys formed the game development process?
Yeah, so I'm from Portland, Oregon, but I came here to Edinburgh, Scotland to do my master's at University of Edinburgh. So I was studying design and digital media, and that's where I met Scott Darcy, who we worked with on our first game, Celine. We were in the same program, and then we were in a game design class where we met Nick Cole Hamilton, who is in the sound design department. But we all came together in this class, and I think instantly kind of hit it off because we all had a common background in gaming, and we had a lot of games in common that we liked. And so being in this class together, I think there was kind of a shared vision that we all had sort of big ideas for what we wanted to do. So in that class, we ended up making Celine for an assignment and putting it online, and feedback was pretty good. It got featured on Game Jolt, which was exciting because we were just like 3 students who just put it up there. So we were like, great, let's just keep making games, and we did. So then the second game was for my dissertation, which I worked with Nick again on that.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely caught Celine there on Game Jolt, and then I was taking a look at your other game, looking back, and I thought that was very interesting that you developed the game for your dissertation, and it's loosely based on, I would say, Greek mythology of, let's see, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Orpheus and Eurydice. Is that correct?
Eurydice, maybe? I don't know. It's all Greek.
So I thought that was interesting that the idea kind of came from that, and then you guys put your own twist on it. Could you tell a little bit more about how you kind of were inspired to make the game and how kind of it came together story-wise?
Yeah, so actually it wasn't really the story exactly that came first, but more the incentive behind the dissertation, which was I was thinking about the way that I think particularly in the academic community and in sort of like the public non-gamer community, there's still a really big perception about like violence in video games, and there are all these psychological studies that talk about how video games make people more aggressive and turn people into sociopaths. And I thought, like, that's such a one-sided way of viewing it. And I mean, as someone who likes games and has experienced a number of different kinds of games that have, totally non-violent, but like really emotionally engaging experiences, I wanted to kind of push back at that from an academic perspective. And explore specifically sort of the opposite angle and say, well, if games, maybe if they cause aggression on one end, can they create really strong empathy on the other sort of side of it? So the idea was to design a game that would somehow draw out those features. And I thought Greek mythology would be a good place to start because they're archetypes, the stories. And I think like they do kind of get to the heart of human issues like love and death. So I think I stumbled upon that one, and it seemed like it would be fruitful for a number of reasons. I think like the underworlds sort of inspired me to make the different levels, the way that the game is segmented in like the 5 rivers of the underworld.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so I think like after that, it was sort of a matter of weaving together this the story, the original myth, and then taking it apart, putting some different spins on it, and trying to design it in a way that would draw out those emotions from players. So then when I would test them and get their feedback, the hope was that they would have these empathetic responses.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that you had done a survey on the player reaction to empathy. So how did that go? Did you find that the response was kind of as you predicted, or was it kind of something surprising?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think, again, as someone who has played games and had, like, really strong emotions from it, it didn't seem out of the question that people would have strong emotions. And I was pretty happy with the feedback. I think people did end up getting a lot really emotionally involved in it, which is exciting both from, like, a research perspective and as a developer. I think, people would sort of side with one character or the other, which was cool because I think that there was sort of a spectrum of some people would try to see both people's sides, some would really side with one or the other. And a lot of people actually, I was keeping track of Let's Plays as well because that was a really useful resource for watching people react in real time. And some of
Yeah.
their responses were pretty funny. Like they would start sort of yelling at the characters. And I thought that was great because it meant that they really were sort of having these reactions. People talked about like their own personal experiences and how things in the game themes that they experienced there were sort of related. And I thought that that was cool that people opened up in that way. There was even one guy. This was the one that surprised me. That he there's a part in the game where you find like this bed with blood in it and some tampons, and this one guy was just like, and he was totally grossed out, and like didn't even want to talk about it. But then as the game sort of went along and you find out more about the circumstances of it, eventually he said something to the effect of like, "Gee, I'm a guy. I didn't know how all of this stuff worked, but I'm still enjoying the story, and I feel like I learned something from it." And I was just like, that's the response everyone wants to hear. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think overall the response was good, and in my results, I just finished writing up my dissertation, and so I said that yes, I think that there is definitely something happening here, and I mean it was kind of a ramshackle study. I mean I don't have a psychology background, but I think that there were definitely real reactions that I was seeing that I thought sort of proved what I was trying to say.
I mean, I think that's a good point. I think that you can experience empathy in games. I've definitely experienced an emotional reaction myself to certain games, especially, playing that game. I could relate definitely to the character of Olivia, who's a traveling musician. I've played guitar myself, so I definitely kind of found myself connecting there. And I've played a few like games recently that kind of took a more emotional turn and definitely kind of counterbalances the idea that, oh, games are violent or they're aggressive. I recently played the game That Dragon Cancer,
Me too.
which is, yeah, which definitely was a very emotional game, and I thought that that was interesting to take a subject like that and make it approachable from a game standpoint. I think that's, it's a wonderful idea, and I think it's a great way to do a dissertation too, to find out that, because I think that's a subject that people don't often talk about. I think more of the subject is this kind of like stereotype. Oh, it's violent, it's gaming, it's Grand Theft Auto, it's running people over with your car. But you can also have this really emotional story driven game. And I think that definitely looking back kind of exemplified that because it was very approachable, from the two diverse characters, the two standpoints, and just the subject of grief itself. I think people have experienced that, and even if you haven't, you definitely find yourself through the process of the game feeling that for those characters and understanding their motivations. I have kind of a strange question. So I noticed the characters' names, Olivia and let me make sure if I'm getting this right. Olivia and Erin. Um, was there any like particular reason why you chose the letters of their first name? Because I do notice a parallel. Orpheus starts with O. Olivia starts with O. Is that kind of like a
Yeah,
motivational decision?
that is literally how I chose the name. That's exactly it. You got it.
Awesome. I thought that that was really cool because when I read the description on Game Jolt, I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. I didn't know the story myself of that tale until I kind of looked it up, and then as I played it, I definitely saw some of the parallels, and then I really liked it. I liked like it was very kind of modernized. I like that when you interact with things, you kind of get their personal opinions on it. So I thought that that was really cool, that take on it, and adding those little clues in there. Like if people are familiar with that, they might have caught that. If not, I thought that was really cool. Um, I guess my other questions would be: do you have any plans in the future to make more of these kind of narrative games?
Totally, yeah. I mean, I think now the floodgates are sort of open. Before this, I hadn't. I've always wanted to make games, but I hadn't really. And then it was just we were in this class, and they gave us Unity, and I was like, oh my god, wait, that's all you have to do. It's that easy. So, um,
Yeah.
I'm going back to Portland actually this week for the indefinite future, but I think definitely the boys and I will keep in touch. We've been throwing around some ideas already for future games, and I think as long as we have a little time and motivation, we'll hopefully keep using games as a MTM.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. That's really exciting. Portland's also cool. I've heard a lot of great things from Portland. I have friends there. I know it's kind of unrelated, but I've seen like Portlandia.
Oh yeah, no, it's very accurate.
Yeah.
I don't even watch it. I just live it. Like,
So that's really cool. So is it difficult to kind of balance? Because I know you were doing, college dissertation. Is it difficult to balance kind of the college and then the game development? Because I know that it takes kind of a lot to put in to make a game like that.
yeah, I mean, for looking back, I mean that one I think was a little easier because it was the dissertation and like literally that was all that I was doing. That was kind of my life. So I banged that out in 3 months pretty much by myself, except for the audio work with Nick. And that was like having never really done a lot of code or like texturing or a bunch of things before. So, but I think it was good because it was a time to where I was able to teach myself those skills and figure things out. Yeah, I think with Celine, I mean, again, it was for a class, so we were able to do that sort of within the context of our schooling. After this, I don't know. I mean, who knows? It could be different. I mean, definitely in the meantime, I will be making games, I hope. Uh, but anyways, I've graduated now, so that's for Scott and Nick to figure out, I guess.
Yeah. So I know that you said you used Unity. Is that kind of like an approachable way to make games? I haven't really experienced it myself, but I've heard a lot of people have used the Unity engine. And I've heard good things. Was that easy to use?
Oh yeah, I love Unity. I think it's really good, especially if you're spatially minded, because it's sort of got this field where you can just drag and drop different assets that you have. Scott has started to look at Unreal, which I think is more the coding side of it. And not
Yeah.
what's funny is that none of us actually have really a coding or a computer background. Um, Scott has a fine art background, Nick is music, and I was creative writing, and so we've all sort of had to pick up these technical skills in order to. We loved games, but we like never really knew how to do any of those things, so we've been playing catch up. But I definitely think Unity was a good place to start because I think it does make it easier if you're less on the technical side and more on the art side.
That's definitely good from an approachable side because I know that there's people who are interested in indie development, but then they're kind of put off by the thought of, oh, there's going to be a lot of coding, it's going to be very difficult. So it's definitely nice to hear that Unreal is a little bit more approachable from that aspect. And that's also interesting that you guys, when you went into work, so Celine was your first game?
Hmm.
So when you went into work with Celine, you guys didn't have that much of a, coding or development background. That's actually really interesting.
Yeah, it was quite an experience, and I think like that too. Like in hindsight, I'm glad that it was the three of us all working on it because I think if it had just been one or two of us, our brains would have exploded. And I mean, initially, before we met Nick, Scott and I had been sort of talking about and planning out to make this game. But we had originally like a much bigger concept before we had any idea of what the work involved would be. And I think slowly as time went on, like the game got much more simplified. We were going to have like whole platforming puzzles and stuff, and then it ended up just being sort of a walking simulator. But I think it was a good starting place because that was sort of our learning curve where we really figured out what all goes into making a game.
Yeah. What would you say is probably the most challenging process of doing indie development from your perspective?
Um, I mean, I think it's just for me at least. I think it's probably just there's so many different aspects of development, and I think when you're a small team and everyone kind of has to be a jack of all trades and figure out, and a lot of it is just figuring out as you go. And I think even with having made Celine, I think looking back was a little more complex, and every time you sort of ramp up the complexity in a game, I think like there's just so many different challenges that you have to sort out, and with limited resources, of course.
Yeah.
I think like one thing that we found frustrating is we'd make the game, we'd put it together, we'd put it out, we'd be like, oh, we've done it, and then of course all of the bugs come up, and everyone's like, hey, this keeps crashing, but. I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard because there's only so much you can do. You have your computer that you're testing on, but no, I mean, I think like that is some of the fun of it. And in a way, like the part that I enjoyed the most about making these games was not necessarily the story or art part that I had more background in, but like the coding and the 3D modeling and things that were more of a challenge that because I felt like I don't know, like I was growing and expanding, getting something new out of it. So it was sort of more engaging on that level in a way.
Yeah, that's definitely something that people think about when they go into indie games is they think it's going to be this really difficult process, but there's also the side of it that it's fun to learn about it. It's fun to experiment and try it out, and even if there's bugs, I mean that's, you learn from your mistakes. So if you have one bug, you fix it, and now in the future, hey, you're probably not going to make the same bug, and
Yeah.
and like you're saying, growing from the first game to the second game more complex, and then even in the future making something even more complex from that, and then stacking on top of that is
But
really, really
I think
cool.
if you love it, then if it's what you want to do. And I think this was sort of where I learned, like, after having made some games, I'm like, yeah, okay, this is really, yeah, I do want to do this after all.
Yeah, I find that indie games them especially are kind of these passion projects. You have to put a lot of love and a lot of caring into them because they're your own time and they're your learning process. For big companies, you have a lot more resources. For small indie teams, it's definitely, like you were saying, jack of all trades. So it's a lot of love goes into it, and if you really, really love it, I think that's great because it shows through in the game. Like in both of your games, Celine and Looking Back, the effort that was put in, I feel, definitely comes across. I enjoyed both games. I definitely felt, for the characters in Looking Back, and you can really tell that there was time spent on that. There was effort put into that, so I really enjoyed that. So I know you mentioned you said you were a creative writer. I also do writing. I do writing for Indie Obscura. So would you say that game development is a good platform for writers as well? Because I don't often hear about the writing side of the game development. I often hear about, the very technical aspect, but it's always interesting to hear more about writing, like the story process. I think one of my favorite games of all time is Alan Wake, which is literally about a writer.
Yeah, yeah.
But what would you say is like a writer? Is that kind of, how is that for development? Is that a cool platform?
I think so. I mean, when I was in my undergrad and I was a creative writing major, I think I sort of, I was actually had a focus on poetry, but I think I sort of dreamed of doing something more than that. And I think that video games are a really interesting medium to work in because I mean, there are so many factors. There's this sort of wild card that is the player's interaction, and I think it's more sort of leaving a. I've heard it in like theory texts. There's sort of a differentiation between linear storytelling and spatial storytelling, whereas linear is like a book or a movie. You read it in order and you take in, versus spatial, where it's more explorative. And I think a game perfectly embodies that. That you're sort of taking pieces and looking at the environment and finding a little diary entry here and talking to a character there, and it's all coming together to form your perception of the story. And I think that that's really cool. I was just watching a GDC talk by, his name is escaping me, but it's the guy who made Her Story.
Okay.
And he was talking about, he was sort of lamenting the fact that games today, like especially big AAA companies, are almost so detailed. There's every little thing. You can go in the bathroom and flush the toilets and turn on the water. And it in a way, it's sort of sad because it leaves nothing to the imagination. And in a way, he was saying the real interactive part of storytelling comes in that sort of filling in of gaps where you don't necessarily see the full picture. I mean, he was using Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho as an example, where you have that great shot
Right.
scene and you don't actually see the knife go in, you don't actually see the killer.
Yeah.
But your brain, I think the human brain tends to sort of fill in those spots. And I thought that was a really interesting point, and I think that is one reason why games, can be so effective as storytelling, because there is, you have this small map, this area in which the player is running around, but there's so much room for a player to sort of project and think about other stuff outside of what they're seeing. So I think that I've always thought that they're the perfect storytelling medium, but that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I've always thought how cool it would be to take, because I write short stories mostly. It's really difficult to write long stories because I find myself going back and then editing it like 20 million times, and it doesn't move forward from there. But I feel like it's really cool to take just the small concept and then to let the player kind of create their own imagery for it. So you have the basis and the base premise. Like, even with Looking Back, you have the base premise, but you could kind of infer your own perspective on it based on how you feel for the character, how you feel for the situation.
Yeah.
And I do agree that a game medium, even though it's not necessarily talked about frequently, is a really great opportunity for writers and storytellers. I mean, it's something I would hope to see in the future people try to approach, because you are right, there is that whole element of, what you don't see and what your mind projects. And I think that like that works really well in even like horror games too. Like if
Oh yeah.
I'm thinking of the first Fear game, where it's mostly what you don't see. It's what your mind thinks of it. Because I mean, you don't necessarily get the jump scares as much as what you're thinking is going to happen, and then that sense of anticipation.
And that's
Eh,
almost scarier because it's just,
yeah,
the worst thing you can think of.
yeah. Your mind comes up with the worst possible monster. You don't even need to think about it. Um, so that's cool. I like the fact that as a writer, you entered the game development process, with some of that in mind. I think narrative games are great and important. Have you ever played the game Dear Esther, where he's kind of
Oh
reading it and
yeah,
walking?
that was a big influence for sure. I think I played that when I was like 19. I was in my sophomore year of college, and I just like played it in 2 hours and then just sat there afterwards like, wow, what do I do now? Like,
Yeah,
no, that was definitely I love games like that. I mean, other in the genre like Gone Home or Firewatch, all good stuff. And I think definitely the like even in just the last 5 or 10 years, I think games have diversified so much. I mean, I think part of it is easier access to tools for making games and more people realizing now that they can put stuff out there. But I think the rise of the indie art game has definitely broadened the kinds of stories that are being told and the way that people can tell those stories. And I think that's fantastic. And so I'll
yeah,
get in
yeah.
on that. So
It's definitely it's exciting. It's exciting to watch that expand and grow. Um, so I guess my last question would be, so as an indie developer, what would be your advice to someone looking to get into development? Besides the fact that the engine that you use is approachable, which is really really good to know, because people are always terrified of thinking it's going to be impossible and it's just this hard project. But what would be your advice to someone approaching the indie development process to kind of keep them going with that idea?
I mean, I think like I'm gonna reiterate the advice that people have given to me and that I always heard. That's just make stuff, just start making things. Like, I mean, I perfect example was kind of put off by like the code, but there are so many tools out there. There are tutorials and walkthroughs galore for code, for C sharp, for Java, for anything you could possibly need to learn how to do to make a game. And so I think just plunging right in and starting to produce stuff. I mean, you'll learn a lot along the way. You'll get better at making games, and if anyone ever wants to work in the industry, then you have a portfolio of stuff to show that says, "Hey, like I'm interested, and I've been taking the steps to figure it out on my own." And it's just fun because then you get a bunch of cool games that are
Yeah.
sitting around. So, make.
Awesome. I think that's great advice. It was definitely really wonderful talking to you. I really enjoyed your games. I look forward to seeing, what you guys make in the future. I'll definitely be keeping track. Um, and yeah, thank you very much for speaking with me. Have a great rest of your day, and awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. You too.
All right.